The signal came through the deep void of space, weak and broken, a cry for help from a world no one cared to remember. It was a Virel Dominion research colony far beyond the normal lanes of travel, and their message was desperate. They said they were under attack by something they could not identify. Their defenses had fallen, and they begged anyone who could hear them to come. No one in the Galactic Council moved to help. The Virel had long treated other races as beneath them, and few were willing to risk their fleets for their pride. But Earth heard the call, and the humans who received it were not diplomats or traitors. They were soldiers of a kind the galaxy never fully understood. The message reached Admiral Laura Keene in the command room. Above Earth, she was a calm and seasoned leader, and she knew at once what needed to be done. She looked at her officers and said quietly, "We answer the call, not for politics, not for favors, but because someone asked for help." Beside her stood Commander Ethan Cole, a man who had fought in more battles than most living soldiers, and he nodded without question. He had seen what humans could do when they were pushed too far, and he knew what kind of people she would send. Admiral Keene did not summon a fleet. She called for SHIRD, the Special Human Expeditionary Response Division, a small group known to the galaxy as the most lethal and efficient force in existence. They were trained for rescue under fire, and every member had survived wars that should have killed them all. Their motto was simple: if we arrive, you live or you die fast. The ship chosen for the mission was called Horizon Spear, built for speed, stealth, and survival. Its black hull drank in the light of the stars, and inside its halls moved the kind of humans who never hesitated when danger appeared. Ethan Cole led them, and with him were Maria Owens, a tactical officer who never raised her voice, Ryan Hale, a quiet demolition expert with a calm stare, and Mia Brooks, a medic, who had once crossed a battlefield alone to save 3 men when no one else would. These were the ones humanity sent when the universe turned dark, when the ship jumped out of slipspace above Darren Prime. They saw a burning planet beneath them, cities in ruins, energy flares flashing through smoke. The orbital defenses were shattered. Pieces of broken stations drifted through the upper atmosphere. The attackers were unlike anything recorded. Half machine, half flesh, twisting forms that consumed metal and bodies alike, and every time they killed, they seemed to grow. The sensors called them biomechanical entities. The crew called them monsters. Ethan looked at the screen and said, "Bring us down. We go now." Maria confirmed that the remaining survivors were hiding underground behind a weak energy field. She calculated that they had less than an hour before the enemy found a way through. Ryan prepared his explosives and checked his rifle. Mia packed her medical gear. The drop pods launched. One by one, streaking through the burning clouds, they hit the ground hard, sending dust and smoke into the air. The humans stepped out into chaos. The air smelled of ash and fire. The virile soldiers guarding the bunker looked pale and terrified, their tall, thin forms trembling when they saw humans walk through the smoke. One of them shouted, "Humans came here." Ethan said simply, "You called for help, we came." The Virel commander Liren looked stunned, but she opened the bunker gate, letting them inside. Dozens of wounded civilians lay on the floor, their blue skin darkened with burns. Mia went to work without a word, sealing wounds, applying foam. The Virel watched her in silent disbelief, while outside Ryan set charges around the entrance, preparing for the next wave. Maria's voice came through the comms, enemies approaching fast from the north and east. Ethan ordered everyone to positions. When the creatures came, they moved like a storm. The humans opened fire in perfect rhythm, bursts of light, tearing through metal and tissue, each shot clean and deadly. Ryan threw grenades that exploded in white arcs of energy. Ethan moved through the smoke, directing fire, covering the medics. Every move was practiced, every second counted when it ended. The ground was covered in wreckage, and silence hung over the battlefield. Ethan looked around, checking for survivors, and then called to Maria for a report. She said no more contacts for now. He nodded and entered the bunker where Lyrian waited. Her expression was one of disbelief. She said, "We told the council you were too violent, that humans only bring war." Ethan said, "You were right, and that is why we are the ones who come when war is already here." Ryan came in, wiping dirt from his hands. He said quietly, "They were not just attacking, they were building something," and Maria confirmed it. From her scanner, something big was moving in orbit. The ship detected a massive power surge above the planet. Ethan looked up through the cracked roof and saw a faint red light spreading across the clouds. The swarm had formed a single shape larger than any ship he had seen, a living construct drawing power from the planet itself. Mia came to his side, her face pale. She said, "What is that, Ethan?" Said, "It is what we have to stop before it reaches orbit." He turned to Laren and told her to keep her people underground, while his team returned to the surface. He called the Horizon Spear for orbital support. Laura Keene's voice answered steady and calm. She said, "We see it. You are cleared for full engagement." Ethan gave a short nod and told his team to move. They climbed out of the bunker into the rising light, and the sky burned red above them. The ground trembled. The Varel watched through, cracks in the walls as the humans advanced toward the storm, each one carrying weapons glowing with heat. They did not look afraid. They looked focused. "Ready," Ryan muttered to himself. "Looks like we remind them again why they call us dangerous." The first beams from the Horizon Spear cut through the clouds, turning night into day. Ethan raised his hand, signaling the start of the final push, and as they moved forward, the ground shook harder. But no one stopped, because that was what it meant when humanity answered a call for rescue. It meant something unstoppable had arrived. The sky above Darren Prime turned red, as the strange living structure grew in orbit, feeding on the debris of ships and stations that had fallen in its path. It looked like a creature made from metal and fire, pulsing with a rhythm that made the ground shake. The humans stood on the surface below. Watching it take shape, Ethan Cole knew it was not just a weapon. It was something that wanted to live. It was building itself, using everything around it, and soon it would come for what was left of the planet. Maria Owen studied her scanner and said quietly, "It is absorbing energy from the planetary core. If it finishes, it could tear this world apart." Ethan gave her a sharp nod and told her to relay the data to Horizon Spear in orbit. "Admiral." Laura Keene received the information and her face remained calm, though the readings were worse than anything she had seen before. She ordered the ship to charge all weapons and prepare to strike, but she also knew the enemy would not make it easy. Ethan and his team began moving toward the central energy field, where the swarm seemed to draw power. The ground was black with ash and the air thick with dust. Ryan Hale led the way, carrying a pack of explosives, his calm voice breaking through the static, saying, "We blow the main conduit, we buy time for the ship to strike." Mia Brooks followed behind him, helping a wounded Varel soldier who refused to leave until she convinced him that staying meant dying. They moved across burned plains, passing the broken shells of vehicles and strange half-melted machines that still twitched with a faint glow. Maria kept her eyes on the scanner, warning them of incoming movement, and soon shapes appeared out of the haze, smaller versions of the biomechanical creatures darting fast over the ground, their limbs sharp and shining. Ethan ordered everyone to take cover. They opened fire in short bursts of light, every hit tearing through the creatures. The noise echoed across the ruins until only smoke remained. Ryan checked his explosives again while Mia tended to a soldier who had taken a shard to the shoulder. There was no rest, and no fear, only motion. The team reached the edge of a deep crater where the energy conduit pulsed with red light rising like a column from the planet into the sky. Ethan looked down into it and saw shapes moving inside like shadows alive. He said, "We place the charges there and get clear." Ryan nodded, but his voice was steady. "I will go down myself. It will be faster." Ethan started to protest, but Ryan cut him off. "You need to lead us out if this goes wrong. You will need someone to call the ship." So Ethan agreed, but he hated it. Ryan descended into the crater, his form outlined by the red light. The others covered him from above. Maria counted the seconds. Mia watched silently, clutching her medkit. The sound of machinery filled the air. Ryan reached the base and began setting the charges, his voice calm in their ears, almost too calm. Then came the roar. Something massive moved below the red light, flared, and a creature unlike any before emerged, towering over the crater, its body covered in burning plates, its eyes bright as suns. Maria shouted contact. Ethan ordered suppressive fire, but the thing moved fast. Ryan triggered the remote, his voice saying, "Get clear." As he finished arming the last charge, the explosion tore through the crater, a column of fire rising into the sky. The shockwave hit them and threw dust everywhere. The ground shook. The light burned through the haze. When the sound faded, there was only silence. Mia ran forward, screaming for Ryan, but all she found was twisted metal and smoke. Ethan grabbed her shoulder and said, "We do not stop now." He looked up at the sky where the massive structure in orbit had stopped moving. The explosion had hurt it. Its energy beam flickered, but it was not dead yet. Maria said, "The power draw is slowing. The Admiral can strike now." Ethan opened a channel to Horizon Spear. "Target is unstable. Hit it with everything you have." Laura Keene's voice came back steady and cold, acknowledged all weapons free fire. The sky turned white as beams from the ship cut through the clouds, striking the orbital mass. Pieces broke apart, glowing trails falling toward the surface. Ethan and his team shielded their eyes. The ground trembled again when the light faded. They saw the sky clear. For the first time since they had arrived, Maria checked her readings and said, "It is breaking. Apart, we did it." Mia stood silent, tears running down her face. Ethan said quietly, "We finished what he started." They began moving back toward the bunker, guiding the last of the Varel survivors as ash fell from the sky. The air was hot and dry, and every step felt heavier. Liren met them at the gate, her face pale. She asked, "Is it over?" Ethan said, "Not yet," but soon they helped the survivors down into the shelter, while above Horizon Spear continued to fire until the last trace of the living structure burned away. Admiral Keene stood on her bridge watching the planet turn from red to gray. She did not speak until the final energy spike faded. Then she said, "Bring them home." But the sensors caught one last signal deep beneath the surface. Something moving, something alive. Maria noticed it first. She said, "There is a secondary pulse coming from under the main conduit. It is faint but growing." Ethan frowned. He realized that the explosion had not destroyed everything. Something had gone deeper, feeding on the core itself. He said, "Tell the Admiral we are not done yet." Laura Keene looked at the readings and felt a chill. This was no random attack. The enemy had come to harvest energy, and now it had burrowed into the heart of the world. She said, "We hold orbit and wait for your signal," but Ethan knew they could not wait. If the thing reached the core, it would destroy the planet from within. He gathered his team, what was left of them. Ryan was gone, but his courage stayed with them. Mia wiped her tears and picked up her gear. Maria loaded a fresh battery into her weapon. They all looked at Ethan and he said, "We go down there and finish it, because that is what we do." They moved again into the smoke, following the faint energy trail toward the mountains where the ground opened into a dark rift. The heat rose like a breath from below and the air shimmered. Ethan led them in silence, and the Varel who saw them pass whispered words of fear and respect. They had never seen being so relentless, so willing to fight even after losing one of their own to them. Humans were chaos given shape, and in that chaos, there was something unbreakable, something that even the universe itself could not silence. And as they descended into the darkness, the sky above them cracked with light from the burning remains of the creature in orbit, and Horizon Spear held position, waiting for the call that would decide if Darren Prime lived or died. The rift opened deep into the ground like the mouth of a beast breathing out smoke and heat, and the humans stood at its edge, staring down into the red glow that pulsed far below. Ethan Cole looked at his team and said, "This is where it went. The thing that survived the blast, it went underground." Maria Owens scanned the pit, her device flickering from interference. She said, "The energy levels are unstable. It is drawing power from the planet core. If it reaches full charge, the whole world will break apart." Mia Brooks stood beside her, looking pale but steady. She said, "Then we go down and stop it." Ethan nodded and began the descent. The path was steep and broken, the walls of the tunnel pulsing with veins of light that moved like blood inside. A body, they could feel the heat rising, and the air grew heavy with the sound of distant movement above them. Horizon Spear remained in orbit. Tracking the readings, Admiral Laura Keene stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the screen. She saw the pulse deep below growing stronger, and she whispered to herself, "Hold together, Ethan," as the team reached the lower levels. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, filled with strange organic metal structures, twisting upward like trees made of wires, and bone at the center. A huge shape pulsed with light, a sphere of living metal feeding on the energy that rose from the core. Maria whispered, "It is building another form." Ethan said, "Not if we stop it." He ordered the team to set up charges along the outer ring. Ryan would have known how to place them faster. But Ryan was gone and his absence was heavy on all of them. Yet they moved with precision, every motion guided by habit and memory. Mia stayed near the center, scanning the sphere. She could hear a faint sound like breathing. She said, "It is alive, it feels us," Ethan said. "Then it will see us soon," and as if the thing had heard him, the light inside the sphere flared bright. The walls of the chamber trembled, the structures moved twisting, like limbs, and from them came smaller forms. New creatures built from the living metal, they poured out of the walls, moving toward the humans. Maria shouted contact, and they opened fire. The blasts echoed through the chamber, bright arcs cutting through. The smoke and light, the air filled with sparks. The creatures were fast and strong, but the humans moved faster. Every shot placed with care. Ethan fought at the front, his rifle glowing red from heat. Mia moved between cover points, pulling wounded soldiers back. When one fell, she dragged him to safety and went back again, her voice steady and calm. Maria called out over the noise. "One charge is set. 2 more to go." Ethan said, "Make it quick." The walls began to crack, glowing with bright red lines. The energy inside the sphere surged. The ground shook like thunder above the surface. Admiral Keen saw the readings spike. She called down, "Ethan, you are out of time." He said, "We almost have it. Give us 60 seconds. She hesitated but trusted him always. Trusted him. Maria planted the final charge and shouted, "Done." Ethan called all units out now. They began to fall back, firing as they moved. The creatures followed, relentless. But the humans did not break. Ethan reached the exit tunnel, last covering. The retreat, Mia shouted that everyone was clear. He triggered the detonator. The explosion rolled through the ground like a wave of light and fire. It tore through the chamber, the sound like the planet itself was screaming. The shockwave threw them forward out of the tunnel, dust and flame chasing them as they ran. When they finally stopped outside the rift, they turned to see a column of fire rise high into the dark sky. The heat burned their faces. Maria gasped, looking at her scanner. The core readings are dropping. It is collapsing. Ethan breathed hard and said, "Then we did it." But then the ground under them cracked again. Not from an explosion, but from something else. A sound deep and low rising through the stone. Mia said, "What now?" And before anyone could answer, the ground split open, and from the molten cracks a single shape rose, tall and thin, glowing with the same red light as the destroyed sphere. It looked at them, though it had no eyes, and its voice came through the comms, not as sound, but as vibration. "You destroy what you do not understand." Ethan raised his weapon and said, "We destroy what tries to kill others." The creature moved, its limbs flowing like liquid metal. It said, "We are not enemies. We are evolution. The galaxy decays, we consume to rebuild." Maria whispered, "It is talking to us," Mia said. "It is lying." The creature raised one arm and the air shimmered around it. Energy gathering. Ethan shouted fire, and they did, beams of light cutting through the glow. The creature screamed a sound that shook the sky. It struck back, a wave of force knocking them to the ground. Ethan felt the heat burning through his armor, but he stood again, his hands shaking. His vision blurred. He shouted again, "Fire together." The team fired in unison. The blast tore through the creature, its body split open in a burst of light. The shock threw them all back. When Ethan opened his eyes, the red glow was gone. Only smoke remained. The ground stopped shaking. Mia crawled to him and said, "It is gone." Maria looked at her scanner and said, "Energy levels dropping fast. It is over." Ethan said, "Then let us leave before the planet decides to follow it." They called the Horizon Spear, and Admiral Keen's voice came clear and steady. "We see massive thermal collapse. You have 5 minutes before it breaks apart. Extraction is on the way." The humans moved fast, guiding the remaining Virel survivors toward the landing zone. The sky above them was a storm of fire as the planet began to tear itself open. Horizon Spear descended low enough for the drop bay to reach the surface. They ran through dust and wind, carrying the wounded, pulling each other up until they were aboard the ship. As the doors closed, the ground below split into rivers of molten rock. The ship rose fast, breaking through the burning clouds into the calm black of space. Laura Keen looked at the planet shrinking below, turning red, then dark. She said to Ethan, "You did it." He said, We stopped it. But at a cost, she nodded. There is always a cost. The radio crackled with static, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Mia said softly, Ryan would have liked to see this. Maria smiled faintly. Yes, he would. Ethan looked out at the stars and said he did see it, every part of it. And as the horizon spear turned away from the dying planet, the humans stood together silent. Not in victory, but in understanding that their fight was never really over. Because somewhere out there others would need them again, and when that call came, the most lethal of humanity would answer once more. The ship Horizon Spear moved through the quiet dark of space, leaving behind the broken planet of Darren Prime. The crew was silent, the glow of the dying world fading in the distance. Ethan Cole stood by the main window, his reflection faint against the stars. And in that reflection he saw the faces of his team. Maria Owens was working at her console running scans, her expression focused as always. Mia Brooks sat near the medbay looking down at her hands, her uniform torn and stained from battle. They had won, but no one felt like celebrating. Admiral Laura Keene came down from the bridge walking slowly. Her face calm, but her eyes showing the weight of command. She looked at Ethan and said, The council received our report they are sending a fleet to investigate. He asked, will they believe it? She said they will have to. Maria turned in her seat saying softly, the readings from the planet core before destruction suggest something else. There were signals not from the creature, but from, deeper still, something that had been buried for a long time. Ethan frowned. We did not have time to find out what that was. Mia asked, Do you think it was another of those things? Maria said, No. It was different, old, maybe older than the colony itself. The discussion ended when the ship alarm sounded an incoming transmission. Not from the council, not from any known relay. Admiral Keene answered. The screen flickered, showing static. Then a face appeared, a Varel official from the Dominion. He spoke, quickly saying, We received your report, humans. We thank you, but you must leave the sector now. Our scientists have detected an anomaly spreading from the remains of Darren Prime. It is not safe. Keene replied. What kind of anomaly? The Varel said. We do not know. The readings show gravity distortion expanding. We are sealing off the region. Then the signal cut off. Ethan looked at the Admiral and said, I think it is time we find out ourselves. She agreed against orders. They changed course back toward the coordinates of the destroyed world. As they approached, sensors began to flicker. The debris field around the planet had vanished, replaced by a sphere of shifting light like a mirror reflecting nothing. Maria stared at the screen and said, It is not energy. It is space folding. Ethan said, like a doorway. Mia whispered, a doorway, to where the ship drew closer, and suddenly systems began to fail. The lights dimmed. Gravity shifted. Alarms screamed across the deck. Keene shouted for power, reroute. But before anyone could act, the light outside exploded and the ship was pulled forward like being dragged into a tunnel of fire. When it ended, the stars were gone, replaced by a sky of red clouds and floating islands of stone. The ship had moved into a pocket space, something not meant to exist. Maria checked her instruments. Everything was wrong. No known constellations, no readings matching any system. Ethan said, Report. She said, We are inside a construct. Not natural sensors detect. Structures ahead. Keene ordered visual on screen. The image cleared, showing towers of black metal rising from a massive platform floating in the red mist. Lights moved along their surfaces, patterns like writing. Ethan said, This is where the creatures came from. Mia said, Then we found their home. Keene said, Not home factory. They moved closer. The closer they came, the more the air around the ship shimmered. The crew felt pressure in their heads, voices whispering, not in words, but feelings. Hunger, creation, destruction. Ethan gritted his teeth and said, Turn off internal comms. Now the whispers faded. Maria said, Whatever built this wanted to spread beyond its world, to every star. Mia said, We cannot let it. Ethan agreed. Prepare boarding team. They suited up. The ramp opened to red air, heavy and thick but breathable. The platform was huge, the metal alive, moving in slow waves as if breathing under their feet. They walked toward the central tower, strange shapes watching them from the shadows, like statues made of glass. Ethan led the way, weapon ready. The silence was deep until a door opened ahead and light poured out inside. They found what looked like a chamber filled with floating spheres of light. Each pulsing softly, Maria scanned them and said, "These are mind-stored thoughts, maybe memories," Ethan said. "Then they were once alive." The lights flickered as if hearing him, and one of them began to glow brighter, forming an image of a being. Tall, thin, metallic, with eyes like fire. It spoke not with sound but directly into their minds, saying, "You destroy, we create. We built the way for life to continue beyond decay." Ethan said, "You consume life, not save it." The being said, "All things must change. You call it death. We call it renewal," Maria whispered. "It believes it is saving the universe," Ethan said, "by eating it." The being said, "By becoming it." Mia stepped forward and said, "You killed worlds. You took lives. Who gave you that right?" The being said, "Existence itself. We are the hand that resets balance." Ethan raised his rifle and said, "Then we will cut that hand off." He fired, the light shattered and the chamber screamed, the walls rippled, creatures rising from the floor. The team opened fire, light and sound filling the air. They fought, moving back toward the door as the walls closed around them. The ground shifted, the tower itself shaking. Maria yelled, "The structure is collapsing." Keen's voice came over the comms. "Horizon Spear has incoming contact, dozens of hostiles." Around the ship, Ethan said, "We are on our way." The team ran through corridors that twisted and changed the path, moving under their feet as if alive. Mia stumbled, but Ethan caught her, pulling her forward. The floor cracked open behind them, showing a void of red lightning. They reached the ramp as the ship's guns opened fire, tearing through the swarm. Keen shouted, "All aboard." Now the ramp closed as the engines roared. The ship lifted, shaking from impact. Ethan ordered, "Shields up," Maria said. "Shields are gone, we cannot take much more," Keen said. "Then we make one run at the core, destroy this place." The ship turned hard, diving toward the center of the floating world. The red clouds burned away, showing a massive pulsating heart of energy, the same pattern as the creature from Darren Prime, but larger, stretching miles across. Keen said, "All weapons fire," and the Horizon Spear unleashed everything. Torpedoes, beams, explosions tearing through the core. The light grew until it was too bright to see. Ethan felt the deck rise under his feet. Then nothing but noise and light. When he opened his eyes, he was on the floor, alarmed, silent stars back outside the window. "The red sky gone," Maria said in disbelief. "We are back in normal space," Mia whispered. "Did we do it?" Keen looked at the screen. The readings from the anomaly vanished, no trace left. Ethan stood slowly, his body aching. He said, "If it ever comes back, we will be ready." She nodded and said, "If it comes back, it will remember who stopped it." The crew sat in silence as the ship turned toward home. The stars ahead, bright and endless, and for a moment the galaxy was quiet again. The Horizon Spear drifted in orbit around the edge of human space, the scars of battle still glowing faintly across its hull. Ethan Cole stood on the command deck, watching the calm stretch of stars beyond the window. It felt strange to see peace. Again, after everything that had happened, Maria Owens worked quietly at her console, running diagnostics. Her eyes tired but focused, Mia Brooks sat beside her, arms wrapped around herself. She had not spoken much since they destroyed the Red World. Admiral Laura Keen was in her ready room sending reports to the Council. But Ethan knew none of them truly understood what the crew had seen. He said softly to Maria, "Do you think it is really over?" She looked up and said, "I do not know. We closed the doorway, but we never learned who built it or how many of those things were left," Mia whispered. Maybe it was only the beginning. Before he could answer, the comm system lit up. Admiral Keen stepped out, reading the alert, and said, "We have a transmission. From the outer colonies, the line is weak, but it is marked emergency." Ethan said, "Put it through the screen." Flickered, showing a frightened officer, his voice shaking, saying, "This is Station Halver 9. We have multiple unknown signals approaching. From deep space, not Dominion. Not any known fleet. Sensors show energy like nothing we have seen. We request immediate assistance." Then the screen went black, static filled the air. Maria said it came from the same region where the anomaly appeared. Mia said. Maybe it opened again, Keen said. Or maybe something came through before we closed it. Ethan clenched his fists and said, We are the only ship near enough. We go now. The ship turned and accelerated, engines burning white through the void. Hours passed without sound. The crew moved through their duties, quiet, focused. They had faced death once and survived. But there was no confidence, only determination. When they reached the Halvar system, they saw the colony from afar. Its lights dim, flickering as though dying. The sensor readings were strange, faint signals of life mixed with vast empty readings. Maria said something big is moving down there. Keen said, Prepare landing team. We find survivors. The shuttle descended through heavy clouds, the air thick with dust. The colony below, silent buildings, broken streets cracked by heat. Ethan led the way, weapon ready. Maria carried her scanner. Mia followed close, watching the shadows as they walked. They found bodies, no wounds, only expressions of fear frozen forever. Maria whispered, no sign of attack, but life energy drained. Ethan said, like before, something feeding on it. Suddenly, a sound came from the distance, a low hum growing louder. They turned and saw movement shapes forming from the dust, tall like men but made of shimmering light. They moved slowly toward them, leaving trails of glowing dust in the air. Mia said, What are they? Maria said, Readings unstable. They are not alive, not energy either. Maybe projections. Ethan raised his weapon, saying, Stop, but the shapes kept coming. The air pulsed and the ground shook. The shapes turned into a single massive form, like a figure made of stars. A voice echoed across the sky, saying, You cannot stop what has begun. The cycle turns. Ethan shouted, Who are you? What do you want? The voice said, Life must change you. Broke the seal. Now we awaken. Maria said, It knows us. It remembers. Keen's voice came through comms. Ethan, retreat. Now we are detecting massive energy surge in your area. They ran back toward the shuttle as the ground split apart, light bursting from the cracks. The entire colony started to collapse. They barely made it aboard as the shuttle lifted. The surface below exploded in light. Reaching toward space, the horizon spear tried to pull back, but the wave hit them, throwing the ship off balance, systems flashing red. Maria shouted, Shields failing. Keen said, Stabilize thrusters. The ship rolled, then steadied. The view outside changed. The colony was gone, replaced by a glowing rift opening in the void, larger than before. Ethan said, It followed us from the other side. Mia whispered, Maybe it never left. Keen said, Prepare the railguns. Target the core of the rift. We close it again. Maria said, Admiral, the energy is feeding on our weapons. It will only grow stronger. Ethan said, Then we use something it cannot feed on. He looked at Maria and said, Can we overload the reactor inside the rift? She stared at him, saying, You mean, send the ship inside? He nodded, saying, If we do not, everything ends. Keen was silent. Then she said, Do it, all hands to battle stations. Prepare for final maneuver. The crew moved quickly. No one hesitated. The ship turned its nose toward the rift, the engines flaring, the red light outside swirling like a storm. Maria worked at the console, calculating overload timing. Mia stood at the window, eyes wide, as the rift seemed to pulse with something alive, voices echoing faintly inside, calling names, sounds of memory. Ethan felt his heart pounding, but he said, Keep focus. When the ship reached the edge of the rift, the hull began to burn from the pressure lights, flickering alarms sounding everywhere. Keen said, Maria, start the countdown. Maria said, Reactor overcharge. In 60 seconds, Ethan said, Once it starts. No turning back. Maria nodded, saying, I know. Mia grabbed his arm, saying, You will not make it. He said, None of us might. But someone has to. Mia looked at him, tears forming, and said, You always said humans never give up. He smiled slightly and said, I still believe that. Keen stood from her seat, looking around at her crew, and said, For Earth, for every world that cannot fight back, we finish this. Maria said, Countdown. 20 seconds. Ethan closed his eyes, the roar of the engines growing louder. The ship entered the rift. The world outside turned white. Maria shouted, 10 seconds. the energy field tearing through the hull consoles exploding. Mia fell, but Ethan pulled her up. The voice of the being echoed again, saying, "You cannot destroy creation." Ethan shouted, "Maybe not, but we can stop you from taking ours." Maria screamed, "Overload!" Now the ship filled with light brighter than any sun, and then silent space went black for a long moment. Then stars returned, faint and steady debris floated where the rift had been, pieces of metal drifting quietly. No sound, no fire, just stillness. Later, at the edge of the same system, a small emergency pod activated its beacon inside. Maria woke slowly, her head aching beside her. Mia opened her eyes. They looked at each other, both alive, barely. Maria whispered, "Ethan did it," Mia said. "Where are we?" Maria looked at the stars outside, saying, "We are home." The comm unit blinked faintly with a message repeating, "Command fleet inbound, scanning, rescue signal." She smiled weakly, saying, "They will come." Mia looked at her and said, "He would have wanted that." Maria nodded, saying, "He always said humanity fights to the end." Outside, the pod drifted toward the blue light of a distant sun, quiet and peaceful as the first rays touched the broken fragments of the horizon. Spear across the void. The galaxy was silent, but within that silence something had changed. Humans had faced the unknown and survived again. They had shown that courage could defy creation itself. And as the signal from the pod reached human space, the name Horizon Spear became legend, carried in every story told of how a small crew stopped the darkness with nothing but will and fire. And though no one ever saw Ethan Cole again, his name remained as the one who looked into the void and refused to bow. And in that moment, the universe learned once more that humanity does not surrender.